Hey, folks. All right. So here we go. I've been making some diagrams here, and yeah, I got my cute little crab drawn that my my daughter drew on the iPad, and yeah, I just wanted to, I got a whole bunch of like bonus diagrams that for finding groundfish, like sea bass and porgies and fluke. And this goes along with the tackling the depths class. Hey, the diagrams aren't perfect. Not everything lines up the best, but it does the job that I need it to do. So here, what do we got? We first got the idea that we're fishing in Long Island Sound. There's going to be big currents. If you are in like 80 feet deep of water, and you got a decent current, you got a couple knots, even a 1 3/4 knots current. That's going to move you along quite a bit. And when you start your drift, and you toss your lead over the back, you're going to be pretty vertical. But as time goes on and you're drifting, if your boat's going and you're not able to maintain bottom and you're letting line out, what's going to end up happening is that lead is going to end up hanging up in rocks. However, if you have a heavier lead on, then as you're going through your drifts, more going to look like this. The way you dropped it, it's more likely to hang that vertical position. It might be a little bit scoped out, but it's going to be more likely to be vertical. And here's the thing, is that as you're picking this up and you're following the contour of the ground, your reel in hand there is going to be like letting a little bit of line out and then reeling a little bit of line in as you lift your rod up and down and tick the bottom with that lead. Here's the thing, is like you get down into like a little snag here. It's way easier when you're vertical to pull it up and out of that snag quick and react to it and get it on top of this rock and bounce and let line out. With this, like this might be like a 10-foot tall rock, which, with that, might not need to let line out, but you're lifting your rod a little higher and dipping it down a little lower up in the boat. And that's not something that you're able to do if you are scoped out. So if you are scoped out like that, what's going to happen is that lead is drifting along. It's going to end up getting snagged, and it's just going to get buried in there. Your rod's going to go, your rod's going to go overboard. Yes, if you're fishing with line that's too heavy for you to snap off right away, you're going to lose your rod. And these are situations where you don't want to have any line wrapped around your hands. At all, no matter throughout all of fishing. All right, so let's dive in. Let's look at some of these diagrams. And yeah, so just another one about scoping out. And this one's just a little more exaggerated. In this one, I'm showing you how easily it is to get scoped out on a relatively clean bottom with just a little bit of rocks. Never mind the importance of having a vertical drift when you are trying to go over significant structure. Here we've got something, a 20, 30 foot tall, rock ledge here. And if you are keeping it relatively vertical, you're going to be able to much more be able to walk that line, bounce your lead up and down, and follow that contour, and then let out line really fast to follow the contour down here, to the bottom, and then continue your drift. One other little illustration I tossed in here, I was like, well, maybe people don't know that, but like, as you're powering up against the current, powering up to set your drift up, you really do want to swing your boat back around and face it in the same direction as the current. So that means you're kind of going up here, you're powering forward to kick it, and then you're quickly putting it in reverse and slowing it down. Until you are not moving, you're at a standstill. And then you're running to the back, you're grabbing your lead, throwing it overboard, getting straight down, so that you're starting your drift right away, right in front of the structure. Not crazy far out in front of it, right where the structure is. And then when you're done fishing that structure, this is where you're like, when you know what's below you, if you know that you haven't been catching anything over here, reel up right here, and there's no need to continue your drift over here. But really what I wanted to illustrate was that if you have your boat facing, up current, if you have boat and your line is going down here underneath your boat, you get the chance of snagging up on your prop and stuff like that. And yeah, wind throws you off sometimes, and sometimes you don't always get the boat facing the way you want. But there are some ideals. So ideally, our boat's always going this way, and we're fishing off the stern for these drifts. So overall, since we are talking about like these three types of fish, don't worry so much about the depths on a lot of these. I just kind of had to like go with a template, and I was like, hey, a lot of the summer I'm fishing 80 feet deep. But earlier in the season, I might be fishing 80 feet deep just to try and find some fish. But once they move in the spawning grounds, they might be in that 20 foot depth or 40 foot depth. But anyway, so here's the thing, is that like you'll have fish that'll be tucked in between rocks. Sea bass really hug close to rocky structures and shellfish structures and stuff like that. And while fluke are not going to swim up into these areas, fluke are going to be out and around in the sandier, gravelly spots around these rocky edges. And porgies and all, porgies will be okay on smaller bits of structure. You will find them. You will find them in the same areas over here. But just to kind of emphasize, rocks and stuff like that, I think sea bass, and that's where I'm going to be focusing my effort on catching sea bass. And the alleyways between and around these rocky areas is where I'm thinking about fluke. And porgies, well, they can kind of be everywhere at times, but they are kind of schooling. So that's where I wanted to show this, is that there are times, shallower water and everything. What I'm showing you here is like, once you find the group of them, you find that little hump where they might be. And really, it can just be like, like a 100-foot long hump of like a little rock deposit, or it could be a shellfish bed or whatever. There's going to be life in that area where water flows over that, up and over and everything, and then down. There's going to be life in those little pockets. And porgies, sometimes you can find them in those areas, especially in shallow water. These might be areas where, hey, you toss out. That would be the exception, where you flip the boat around, have it facing into the current, and toss an anchor out this way, and then maybe drop a chum pot over something like this. But anyway, once you really know where they are, part of this illustration is to say, hey, there's no need to start your drift way far ahead of the structure, and there's no need to keep fishing beyond that structure if you know that it's just a whole lot of nothing. If the fish are here, target your drifts. When you get to the end, you're like, okay, not catching anything, reset, go right up, and since you're in shallower water, what you would want to do is go around the structure, not buzz right over it, but go around the structure, reset up here, and then put your boat into reverse, and then drop straight down. So a lot of these I have pictures showing just like little high-low rigs. So all right, so ledges and boulders over a large over a large span. Oh, that's what I meant with this, was like some rocky areas that we're fishing have like boulders, and then more boulders, and rocky ledges, and more rocky ledges. And so what I wanted to show with this one was an example of sometimes you can get some really long drifts where you can line it up, and you can fish one rock and then drop it down, and you might catch some fluke in that area between. In the springtime season, that's where I'm honestly catching fluke, is the sandy areas between these rock piles. So I'm usually fishing with like a rig that's a relatively big high-low rig, that's baited for with squid or whatnot for the sea bass, but it's got bigger size hooks on it, so that the any scup that might be around might not be able to really get in their mouth. But I'm fishing those high-low rigs and letting line out down into these sandy areas and following that contour. So as this is drifting along, again, I'm trying to keep as vertical as possible. This is about as much scope as you would want, as vertical as possible. So you're increasing the lead. If you can't keep vertical, the solution is increase the lead, increase the weight that you have. And what I'm really just trying to show here is where are those fluke going to be in the early part of the season, and the fact that there really is something here. Look at with the depths here, I did try to scale the rocks here. You might have a 40-foot ledge, and that means that up in the boat, you've got to be reeling up as you're ticking bottom, ticking bottom, ticking bottom. You're like, and so you look at your sonar and you're like, oh man, we're about to go over a ledge. So you know that you got to start reeling in, tick bottom, reel in, tick bottom, tick bottom, tick bottom, reel in a little more, and then you're like, okay, oh, there's the drop off on the sonar. We're about to go down, and then you're letting line out. Woo, let line out, let line out. Let it follow the bottom. If you keep it up here and just hover it up here, look at all the fish that you're missing. If you don't drop it back down so that you're feeling bottom, you are missing all the fish. Because these fish, even though I drew them here, they are really hugging down low against the rocks. All right. They're not venturing up, 20 feet to find your rig. So yeah. So all right, what do we got? So continuing with porgies here, you might have some kelp fields in your area. If you got kelp fields and stuff like that, and some shallow water, whether it's that sugar kelp stuff or this can be a spot to take a drift on through. With that shallow structure, there may not be a hump or anything like that, but the fact that you have some life down there, if there's life down there, vegetative life, then there's going to be other little critters that they're going to want to eat. And that would be a good spot for drifting through for porgies. Again, no life, don't drift there. Start the drift right here where the life begins. Sonar is going to really help you see that. So another forms of life is that maybe you're not seeing kelp and stuff like that on the sonar or on the charts, but you see that the bottom's like a little fuzzy and stuff like that. When the bottom on your sonar is a little fuzzy, usually means that what you're going over is like shelf fields, and small little rocky reefs, maybe boulder, tiny rocky fields and stuff like that. And so this can be an area where I extended this one just to show that sometimes you can get some really long drifts in, just drifting by, and continually just catching fish. They'll be in pockets, they'll be in schools, but because the structure might be over the course of just acres and acres of structure like this, sometimes you can just be lucky and just drift over that. Sometimes you might have to zigzag over the surface of that structure to kind of find where they are. But all right, so again, no growth, no life. Don't bother there. By the way, this type of structure is also the type of little pocket structure where you can find fluke and stuff like that. All right, so ledges. Ledges and boulders over a large area, but with bait. Okay, so here's the thing. I have this a little bit out of order, but that's okay. That's my bad. But remember the other slide. We'll just go back and find the ledges here. So over a large area, but there's no bait, is that you really could have pockets of black sea bass on this rock and pockets on this rock. If there's no bait in the area that's really kind of drawing them to one or the other, then they're going to be kind of randomly scattered around. I intentionally drew these as like little groups because when they're on the rocks, a larger male is going to be around defending its area, and another one defending its area with a little harem of females. As those females spawn, and lay eggs in the rocky areas in the spring, those males are going to be there to spawn and fertilize those eggs. So anyway, here we go a couple ahead to where we have. But what if there's bait around? So let's say you're going over and you see with your sonar that you've been seeing no bait, and then you go over one rock and you're like, whoa, there's something down there. This is a spot you want to hang out in because the fish that are over here, they are going to, they can use their sense of smell. They are all going to migrate into this area. So that could be porgies and fluke bringing in around the area. Again, fluke aren't going to be on the rocks, but they might be around this area here where fish are getting swept up and over. I'm trying to show that, and also showing that bait might also get swept around the rocks, and fluke will be advantageous hunters, ambush hunters in that way, hunting around these rocky structures in the sand, but getting the bait that's there. So again, if you see bait in the water, that is your number one sign to dial it in on the rocks in that area, or the structure in that area. a lot of times you're going around and you don't see bait. You don't see bait. So those few times where you see like not the signals from your prop in the water and the fuzzy bubbles in the water, but down near the rocks, you see little fuzzy bits above the rocks on your sonar. That's a sign to stay put, and do short drifts, not to keep drifting over to this area. If the bait is over here, stick over there, and you're going to have a great time. You might have a whole tide cycle where you're just catching and catching and catching. And because of that, because of the bait concentration, that's going to bring in more of those aggressive males. They're going to come from their hiding spots to where the food is. They're not dumb. All right, so what else we got? So, kicking it over to fluke a bit. Really the thing with sea bass is like hug the rocks and everything. Porgies, my God, they can be just like everywhere at sometimes. They're very abundant, but fluke over mixed bottom, sand, gravel, shellfish, and stuff like that. You can have these like relatively flat spots where they'll be dispersed, and it can be worth prospecting. What I'm showing here, you could do a high-low rig here, or like a John Skinner bucktail rig. This is like a 3-way rig. Don't worry the fact that I just had to use some kind of little drawing, but this would be some kind of baited end. This could be a spoon rig or something like that. But the idea is that you're still trying to hold vertical. You got that 3-way swivel, you got a lead, and that lead is ticking the sand, ticking the shellfish, ticking against the rock. And about 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet long, you've got a trailer, you've got this running line here that has your baited hook, and you're just keeping that low to the ground. Without bait and all, this is just prospecting. This is prospecting and seeing, are there pockets of them waiting to ambush? I do tend to find that when there's going to be a drop-off, like that can be a spot where I see some up top and I see some down below, but I might not necessarily see them ahead of the drop-off. Okay. Fluke over sand waves. So again, we can have sand waves that are relatively deep, and sand waves that are shallow. So we could have 20-foot sand waves, 20-foot deep sand waves that are have wave heights that are only going up a couple feet, up or down a couple feet. But we can also have sand waves that are really far down, that are cresting 20 feet high and 20 feet low from those crests. And again, I tend to find this is a great thing to just prospect along. If you're not seeing bait, just keep dragging along those sand waves, and just pay attention to the whole thing. But I tend to find that they concentrate, just as the sand wave dips down. All right, so here's the thing. But what if there's bait? Again, if there's bait around, I'm not messing around with the sand waves where I didn't find bait. So this might be like, a mile away. I'm not going to bother with that because, I scooted and went a whole mile this way, just powered on down, and I tried another spot, and you know what? I found bait over there, and if I find bait in this spot, that means I'm going to just keep drifting in this spot. At the edges of that is where you might find smaller fluke, but the bigger fish will congregate towards the best bait source. So if you, again, happen to find bait on your sonar and you're going over this type of structure, stay there. And again, concentrate your drift. There's no need to be drifting in this area when the bait is in that other, smaller zone. I debated whether or not to put something like this in, but man, some of my favorite spots are some spots that are very rocky, and this would be something like maybe like the Race or something like that, where you really have a rocky ledge that comes within 30-40 feet of the surface, and it's very fishable. And then there's just complete drop-offs on either side. The Plum Gut has this, the Race has this. It's not an uncommon structure, but it's also not everywhere in the Sound. When you have big drop-offs like this, whenever you have big drop-offs like this and there's current, you're going to end up having some big standing waves and stuff like that. And so here's what I'd say is that, like, in general, when you're seeing those standing waves, that might not be the best time for you to try bottom fishing. It might be a good time for you to try and get some stripers and stuff like that in this zone, or some bluefish in that zone, re-rig, use something else than a high-low rig for this. Or wait until that current turns off or gets closer to slack, and that's where you can probe and work your way up here, and then the current flips the other direction, and you can probe and work this way before the big rips build in and everything. And this would be, again, an example of the structure. You're going to have fish up and down that structure, but in the really deep holes, you're not necessarily going to have these bottom fish in those really deep holes. Think about the sun penetrating the surface. There's going to be more life, more growth along the rocks at the top, and more food sources at the top that they're going to, be swimming around, and bait fish at the top and everything, than hunkered down low. Okay, let's move on. All right, wrecks, of course. I think this is the last slide. Yeah, last slide. So wrecks, of course, are worth going to. So I did happen to do like an example of like a deep wreck. You get a shallow wreck or something in the 30 or 40 foot range. Absolutely same thing. Wrecks end up growing life all over them. The whole thing gets covered. If you haven't seen John Skinner's windmill video looking at the Block Island windmills and everything, and how much those windmill pylons are covered with life now, they are completely there's no bare metal at all. They're completely covered in life, and they've become an artificial reef. The same thing happens with shipwrecks. So that's what I did. I took one of these boats, and I just copied it a whole bunch of times and flipped it upside down. And so we got a shipwreck that's here. But what I wanted to illustrate is that shipwrecks are places where you're going to get hung up, because this is man-made structure, and you've got a lead, and you still are tapping in here. You might tap into the wrong place, and you're going to lose some gear fishing these, but you might also have some of the biggest fish, trophy-sized fish, hiding out in these wrecks, because they're, especially the deep ones, they're not going to be fished very often, and you'll still have your little mating groups and stuff like that, but these deep water wrecks can be spots where you have a fish camping out, munching down on crabs and munching down on other like little shellfish and stuff like that are down in that zone. Again, tight drifts. Look how far away the structure is here from you. You really need to get that vertical jigging, or else you're going to lose gear. Vertical, dialing in that weight, maybe attempting this when there's little to no current. If you notice in even this one, I did decide, I was like, yeah, you know what, we still fish these areas when there's some kind of current, but this might be one of those where you go here at slack time. And maybe you're not doing a high-low rig. Maybe this is where you're trying to break out one of them fancy little jigs that you got. All right, so again, dialing in your drift. You're not going to be fishing this area. You're not going to be fishing this area, because where the wreck is where the life is. It's not spread out everywhere along the bottom. You're probably just going to have like sand and not lifeless, but not as life concentrated as that wreck. All right, folks. Hope this was helpful. Hope this again just gives you ideas of what you can look for on the maps, and when you get to a spot, what you can do, strategy-wise to attack different types of bottom structure. Again, man, you see bait, that's where you want to hang in. And when I'm not seeing bait at the surface, I'm seeing bait on my sonar. So I'm looking at my screen, and that's what I'm seeing down there. It's more often that I see it on my sonar than I see a fish throw it up on my boat first. All right, take care, folks. We'll end the video here.